touch the placenta cover instead. And you can read that in about three places in the hadith, in the tradition. That is a large amount of agreement. Would you agree? It's a large amount of commonality. Now, as I said before, there are, in any good discussion, there's an effort to sort of figure out where we agree and also to figure out where we disagree, what the differences are, what the distinctions are. So what I want to do now is turn for a moment to the distinctions. Because the distinctions are actually quite large as well. Differences are quite vast as well. So as much as there is in common in what the Bible and what the Qur'an teaches about Jesus, the big place of distinction is in what do these things mean? What do they mean? What does it mean to say that Jesus was real, historically, that he was a prophet that spoke the words of God, that he did miracles that confirmed that he was a prophet speaking the words of God, that he was virgin born without sin? Why? Why without sin? Why faultless? Surely all human beings, all of us know that we sin, that we have fault, that we're not perfect. Show me a perfect man, and I'll show you someone who doesn't know himself very well. Right? Why? Well, to think about that, I want to read a passage from the Gospels. This is the Gospel of Mark, believed to be the first gospel written. The Gospels are part of the Revelation. The Qur'an, Muslims believe that there are other revelations given by God, the books of Moses, the Psalms of David, and the Gospels. And so I'm going to read here from a passage in one of the Gospels, the Gospel of Mark, where Jesus takes up this question. Who is Jesus Christ? Who do you say that I am? So listen along as I read, beginning in Mark chapter 8, verse 27. Now Jesus and his disciples went out to the towns of Caesarea Philippi, and on the road he asked his disciples, saying to them, who do men say that I am? Excuse me. So they answered, John the Baptist. But some say Elijah, and others one of the prophets. He said to them, but who do you say that I am? And Peter answered and said to him, you are the Christ. Then he strictly warned them that they should tell no one about him. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things, and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He spoke this word openly. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when he had turned around and looked at his disciple, he rebuked Peter, saying, get behind me, Satan, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men. And when he had called the people to himself, with his disciples also, he said to them, whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. But what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him the Son of Man also will be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. Now, this is a dramatic passage. Earlier in this chapter, the writer here, Mark, tells us of one of the miracles that Jesus had just performed. He had sort of taken a few loaves of bread and some fish and miraculously multiplied it to feed thousands of people. And it's after that event that they're traveling, and he's walking along the road with his followers, his earlier followers, and he asks them this question. What do the people say about me? Who do they say that I am? And you see how the followers sort of, go through a number of different options. Well, some say you're John the Baptist. John the Baptist had been another prophet. It's a cousin of Jesus, actually. And others say, some say you're Elijah, because in the Old Testament, there's a prophecy about Elijah coming back. And others said, well, we think you're that prophet. They think you're that prophet. Referring probably to Exodus 18 or Deuteronomy 18, where God promises in the law of Moses, in the book of Moses, that another like Moses shall come, another Israelite, who would do more miracles than Moses. And so they go through these options, and Jesus really presses the point home. He says, okay, that's what the people are saying. But you profess to be followers of mine. What do you say? Who do you say that I am? And then this revelation. Peter says, you are the Christ. He gives him that title. It's an important title. It's the Greek translation. It's the Greek equivalent of an old Hebrew word, an old Hebrew idea called the Messiah. You are the Messiah. You are the promised deliverer. You are the one that Israel has been looking for hundreds and thousands of years. You're the one that has been promised from of old. You are the Christ. You are the one to deliver us, the Messiah. Now, interestingly, Muslims and Christians agree on this point too. So in the Qur'an, some 11 times, Jesus is referred to as the Messiah, Masih. So, it's a point of agreement here. But what does Jesus go on to say about who he is, and more specifically, what he will do? He goes on to tell them, if you have a Bible, if you want to write this down and look at it later, he goes on to tell them in verse 31, it says, he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things, and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise. This is the central teaching of Christianity. And this is the place where Christianity and Islam sort of go separate ways. Jesus understood himself to be the Messiah. His followers were coming into the recognition that he was the Messiah. And yet Jesus has an understanding of what the Messiah will do that is quite surprising to his followers in that day. His followers earlier on thought that he would come and usher in a new political kingdom and the rule of God on earth for eternity. But there's something that must happen before that. That is his rejection. And we know from the Gospels, all of the Gospel writers tell us that the Jewish leaders of that day rejected him. That many of the people of that day would eventually turn from following him. They had come to him in throngs and masses of people because he was doing these great miracles. But when he started to ask this question, who do you say that I am? Well, then people were beginning to separate themselves. And particularly when he taught that I must die and be raised again. This is his teaching about the resurrection. From this point on through the rest of the gospel is focused on the resurrection. The crucifixion of Jesus Christ on the cross, a Roman torture tool, and his subsequent burial and his rising from the grave. This, Christians believe, is the greatest miracle. This, Christians believe, is the miracle that most authenticates Jesus' message about himself. He tells us something else in this passage. He describes himself as the Son of Man. Now, we might misunderstand that reading that in English. But he is pulling another title from the Old Testament, from the prophet Daniel in particular, that is a title not of his humanity, but of his deity. Daniel had a vision in Daniel chapter 7 where he sees God on the throne. It's a vision. It's not literal. It's a prophetic vision. And he says, I saw one glorious, radiant, like the Son of Man. And so when Jesus appropriates this title, when he accepts being called Christ, Messiah, he is in fact affirming his deity. He's not just a historical man. And he's not just a prophet. But part of his message about himself is that he is in fact God. He is the Son of God, one with God. And so in another gospel, John chapter 10, verse 30, I believe, you can write that down, somewhere around verse 30. Jesus says, I and the Father are one, that no man comes to the Father except by me. In another place where his disciples are confused about his having to die and be resurrected, they said, show us the way, show us the Father.